It was 7:02 p.m. when the first patrol car rolled up lights, flashing like a crime scene out of a TV drama. But this wasn't fiction. I was standing barefoot on my own porch, keys in hand, staring through the window at a stranger lounging on my couch, casually live streaming from inside my lakefront retreat. My lakefront retreat. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the HOA president, Carla Bennett, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood, was already on the driveway flagging down the officers like she'd just saved the world. Her voice rang out sharp and dramatic. That's him, the stalker. He's been terrorizing her for weeks. Terrorizing? I hadn't even met this woman before. Meanwhile, she, this so-called victim, was clutching her phone like a lifeline, sobbing on cue as if she'd just escaped a horror film. Within minutes, I was surrounded by flashing lights, officers barking orders, neighbors gawking like I was some headline in the making. And as they cuffed me on my own property, one thought kept pounding in my head. How the hell did I go from a business trip to being a criminal in my own home? 8 months earlier, if you had told me I'd be standing in handcuffs outside my own house, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, life was simple. My name is Ethan Cole, and my lake cabin in Cedar Falls was supposed to be my sanctuary, a reward for years of coding through sleepless nights and building a career from scratch. It wasn't just a property, it was the one place where I could unplug and breathe. And then came Carla Bennett, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics. If there's one thing Carla loved more than Chardonnay at the clubhouse, it was control. The war didn't start with screaming or lawsuits. It started with paint bright, toxic, burn your retinas paint. Carla's house looked like a neon billboard crashed into a Barbie dream house, bubblegum pink with electric blue shutters. It was a crime against architecture and against every single line of our HOA handbook, which she herself had written. I filed what I thought was a standard complaint, thinking the board would handle it quietly. She'd repaint, life would go on. But nothing about Carla was quiet. The next community meeting turned into a circus. 50 people packed into the clubhouse, the air thick with gossip and judgment. Carla stood there trying to justify why her house looked like a cotton candy explosion, while the compliance officer read aloud every regulation she had violated. When the vote passed for mandatory repainting, the look on Carla's face could have melted steel. I should have walked away that night. I should have realized that humiliation is the kind of wound some people never let heal. Instead, I went home thinking justice served. What I didn't know was that the $18,000 repaint job I had forced on her didn't just bruise her ego, it nearly bankrupted her. And desperate people don't just get angry, they get creative. Carla didn't scream, she didn't lash out. She smiled. She waved when I drove by. She complimented my landscaping and asked about my software projects like we were old friends. Meanwhile, behind that saccharine smile, she was planning something so cold-blooded it would make a Wall Street shark look compassionate. For months, she gathered intel, my routines, my travel schedule. She knew I flew to Seattle every few weeks for client meetings. She knew my cabin sat alone at the end of a tree-lined street where no one would question a different car in the driveway. And most importantly, she knew how to weaponize the one thing that could dismantle my life without firing a single shot the law. Enter Stephanie Lane, or as I would later call her, the actress of the century. Recently divorced, drowning in debt, and desperate enough to believe Carla's pitch about helping women in crisis. That's the story Carla fed her. We're building a safe house network for domestic abuse survivors. Ethan's cabin perfect. He's hardly ever there. Stephanie didn't just move in, she moved in like a ghost story that slowly takes over the house. Carla armed her with a backstory so detailed it could have won an Oscar-stage bruises with professional-grade makeup, falsified police reports, therapy notes documenting trauma, even fake medical records. They had prop scripts and rehearsed lines for every scenario, including what to do if I walked through the door unexpectedly. And then came the perfect storm. My biggest client in Seattle canceled last minute. Instead of being gone for a week, I drove back home, 5 days early, eager for a quiet evening by the lake. What I pulled into was a different reality. Curtains I didn't buy hung in my windows. A car I didn't recognize sat in my driveway like it belonged there. Through the glass, I saw her Stephanie giving a live house tour to hundreds of strangers on social media. "Welcome to my cozy little getaway," she cooed into the camera, gesturing toward my reading nook, describing my kitchen, the one where I make my morning coffee. I stood there on the porch keys cutting into my palm, wondering if I'd lost my mind, or if I had just stepped into the opening scene of a psychological thriller. But this wasn't a movie. This was the start of the most calculated takedown of my life, and the first domino in a chain reaction that would expose corruption on a scale I couldn't begin to imagine. When I stepped onto my own porch that night, I expected silence, maybe the faint creak of old wood and the smell of pine drifting in from the lake. Instead, I was greeted by laughter, a stranger's laughter echoing from inside the home I built with my bare hands. Through the living room window, I saw her again, Stephanie Lane. She was holding up her phone, angling it just right, so her followers could admire what she called her cozy sanctuary, my sanctuary. The comments were flying across the screen, "Love the vibe." "That couch is gorgeous." One follower even asked for a full kitchen tour. My pulse spiked as I gripped the doorknob, ready to demand answers. That's when I noticed the details, the devil in plain sight. My family photos were gone, replaced by her smiling face framed in thrift store chic frames. My closet. Through the cracked door, I saw women's clothes hanging where my shirts used to be. Even the fridge wasn't mine anymore. Organic almond milk and kale where my beer and takeout boxes had been. This wasn't a squatter, grabbing a few nights of free lodging. This was someone who had moved in, claimed the space, and erased me from my own life. I knocked hard. The laughter stopped. Then came the look, a flicker of surprise, before Stephanie's face transformed into sheer terror. She bolted toward her phone, dialing with trembling fingers. Seconds later, she was screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "He found me. Oh my God. Please hurry. He's here." My gut turned to ice. What the hell was happening? Before I could speak, tires screeched on gravel. Enter. Stage. Left Carla Bennett, HOA royalty, wearing a ridiculous tactical vest that screamed crisis responder like some neighborhood vigilante cosplay. She had a clipboard in one hand, a phone in the other, barking into it like she was directing a SWAT team. 911. "We have an active domestic violence situation at 19 Cedar View Lane," she said, her voice dripping with urgency. "The abuser just showed up. Victim is terrified for her life. Abuser, she was talking about me." I tried to interrupt, tried to shout over her performance, but Carla just turned up the volume, pacing dramatically in front of the porch, like a martyr protecting her flock. Meanwhile, Stephanie sobbed on cue inside the house, her voice cracking perfectly at all the right places. 5 minutes later, blue and red lights washed over the trees. Officer Martinez stepped out, hand hovering near his holster. "Sir, step away from the door," he barked. Finally, I thought, the nightmare ends here. I had my driver's license, property deed, mortgage documents, everything to prove this was my house. I laid it all out like a student presenting homework. But then Carla pulled her ace from the deck, a thick manila folder filled with what looked like damning evidence. Photos of Stephanie, with bruises so real they could make a cop's stomach turn. Falsified police reports from another state claiming she'd fled an abusive ex. Therapy notes documenting her trauma recovery, and the pièce de résistance utility bills and mail addressed to Stephanie Lane at my address. To Officer Martinez, it looked black and white, terrified woman, established residence, and a man standing on the porch like an intruder. Every protest I made sounded like classic abuser gaslighting. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back," Martinez said. The sound of the cuffs snapping shut burned into my brain like a branding iron. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the driveway, smartphones raised, recording the humiliation of the century. Their faces said it all. There's the monster we always suspected. As they led me to the squad car, Stephanie stood in the doorway, clutching a throw blanket, her eyes wide with fake fear. And in that moment, I realized something that chilled me more than the cold steel on my wrists. This wasn't just a setup. This was theater. and I was the villain in their script. But what I didn't know yet, the play had just begun. The motel smelled like bleach and broken dreams. I sat on the edge of a stiff mattress, the hum of an old air conditioner drowning out the chaos in my head. Hours earlier, I'd been a homeowner. Now I was a headline waiting to happen. I pulled out my phone, a mistake I'll regret forever. Notifications exploded like fireworks. Text messages from friends asking if the rumors were true. Emails from clients suddenly reevaluating our contracts. And the real gut punch, a viral video titled Escaping My Stalker, My Safe Haven Story. Stephanie's face filled the screen, eyes glistening with perfectly timed tears. Her voice quivered as she spoke. I thought I was finally safe, but then he found me. 500,000 views in 12 hours. Comment sections dripping with rage. Lock this creep up. Stay strong, queen, we've got your back. Why is this monster still free? Every swipe felt like another shovel of dirt on my grave. My name was trending for all the wrong reasons. And the worst part, the internet believed her, completely. I stared at the ceiling, fighting the panic clawing at my throat. The law was supposed to protect the innocent, right? But Officer Martinez's words echoed like a death sentence. Domestic violence law prioritizes victim safety above all else. Translation. She claimed fear I lost my home. The legal consultation didn't help. My attorney laid it out like cold steel. Proving a false abuse claim, nearly impossible. Minimum $20,000 in legal fees just to start. A restraining order already in place, banning me 500 feet from my own property. It felt like quicksand. The harder I fought, the deeper I sank. But when you've got nothing left to lose, something changes. Panic turns to purpose. And that's when the developer in me woke up. If this was a system error, I was going to debug it. I opened my laptop and started building timelines. Stephanie's social posts versus my travel receipts. Metadata from her videos. Inconsistencies in her story. Patterns emerged fast. She'd posted about settling into her safe space on dates when I had time-stamped receipts proving I was still in Seattle. She referenced a coffee shop that didn't even open until 2 weeks after she supposedly moved in. Evidence, cold hard evidence. But evidence means nothing without someone who believes you. And in a world where every neighbor had me pegged as a monster, that person came in the form of Robert Hayes, a retired detective with eyes like X-rays and instincts honed from 30 years in law enforcement. He found me at the grocery store standing in front of a shelf of canned soup, like a man trying to decide if life was worth living. His voice was low, calm, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much. Something about this stinks, he said. Real victims don't act like this. Their stories don't read like scripts. Those words cracked something open inside me, a lifeline in a sea of doubt. Robert had connections, experience, and one priceless trait: he smelled the con. And as we sat in that dingy motel room with a pot of burned coffee between us, he told me something that made my blood run cold. You're not the first. That night, I stopped being a victim, and I started hunting the truth. Robert leaned back in the motel chair, its metal legs groaning under his weight, and fixed me with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. You're not the first, Ethan, he repeated, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of property deeds, restraining orders, and newspaper clippings, different names, same pattern. Homeowners forced out after false abuse claims. Properties sold for pennies on the dollar. Every single one connected to a homeowners association. I flipped through page after page, my stomach churning with each story. These weren't random coincidences. This was a playbook, a script someone had been perfecting for years. Robert pointed to a photo of a gray-haired man with tired eyes. Kevin Morrison lost his $220,000 cabin last year, spent 8 months fighting in court, gave up when legal fees hit 40 grand. You know where that house is now owned by a shell company tied to a real estate broker with HOA connections. It hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't just about me. This was organized theft disguised as victim advocacy. Robert's tone hardened. I've seen grifters, but this is a machine, and your friend Carla Bennett. She's not working alone. He wasn't exaggerating. Within 48 hours, Robert traced payments flowing through a maze of LLCs, all linked to properties abandoned under suspicious circumstances. And then came the kicker, a name that kept popping up like a bad penny: Angela Torres. Angela was the ghost in the machine. Photos showed her with different hairstyles, different towns, always at the center of these so-called rescue missions. She wasn't just stealing homes. She was running an empire, training women to weaponize domestic violence laws, turning property theft into a full-blown business model. The more we dug, the darker it got. Stage photos of bruises applied with professional-grade makeup. Pre-written scripts for tearful social media posts. Guides on manipulating law enforcement right down to which phrases trigger the strongest protective response. And Carla, she was the perfect recruiter, power-drunk, image-obsessed, desperate for money after that $18,000 repaint job. She'd sold herself as a community savior while secretly cashing checks for every homeowner she helped destroy. But if Carla thought I'd roll over like the others, she miscalculated. I had something the rest didn't: a tech brain hardwired for patterns and a reason to burn their whole house of cards to the ground. Robert grinned when I told him my plan. "You're gonna fight back with code." "Not just code," I said. "Data." I built a digital case file like a prosecutor on steroids. Screenshots of Stephanie's posts cross-referenced with GPS metadata. Time-stamped receipts proving I was out of state when she claimed I was stalking her. Voice analysis on her live stream audio that picked up rehearsed inflections tells even an actor can't hide. And then, the break we didn't expect. Stephanie slipped. During a coaching call with Carla, she accidentally hit go live instead of record. For 3 glorious minutes, the internet watched Carla spoon-feed her lines: "Make sure you cry when you mention the hiking trail. And don't forget, he threatened to finish what he started." Say it exactly like that. By the time Stephanie killed the stream, it was too late. Screen recordings spread like wildfire. Suddenly, cracks appeared in the flawless victim narrative. Comments started shifting. "Wait, is this staged?" That was the first domino. And when they fall, they don't stop. Robert moved fast, pulling favors from his old law enforcement buddies. He had me keep quiet publicly while he worked angles I couldn't touch. Meanwhile, I was piecing together something massive: a map that connected Carla Angela and a web of stolen homes spanning 3 states. What began as one woman squatting in my cabin was unraveling into a conspiracy so vast it made me wonder how many lives they'd already destroyed. And the scariest part, they weren't done yet. Because the deeper we dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about power greed and a network that would do anything to keep their empire alive. The day Stephanie's live stream leak went viral, my world tilted on its axis. For weeks, I'd been the villain in everyone's story: neighbors whispering, coworkers avoiding eye contact, strangers spewing venom online. But now, for the first time, the tide was turning, and I wasn't about to waste it. Robert and I doubled down. He leaned on 30 years of investigative muscle, while I weaponized every bite of data I could scrape. Together, we became an unlikely strike team: old school instinct paired with bleeding edge tech. Our first big win came when Stephanie cracked. The pressure of maintaining the perfect victim act was eating her alive. Robert noticed the sign's trembling hands during live streams posts that sounded rehearsed, the way her eyes darted like a trapped animal. When he approached her with a simple proposition, immunity in exchange for truth, she didn't say yes right away. But doubt had already poisoned Carla's narrative. And then came the notebook. Stephanie found it tucked in Carla's kitchen drawer, a spiral-bound playbook of destruction. Detailed scripts for every scenario. What to say when the property owner returns. How to trigger maximum sympathy from cops. Which hashtags generate the most engagement during victim posts. It was chilling, like reading the director's notes for a horror movie where I'd been cast as the monster. But what made my blood boil were the contingency plans: what to do if the lie started to unravel. Options ranged from doubling down with fake police reports to staging an actual attack and pinning it on me. Robert's jaw clenched when he read that part. Ethan, if they can't win in court, they'll win by ruining you permanently. That wasn't paranoia. Days later, Stephanie's FBI handler confirmed the nightmare scenario Carla had arranged for a hired thug to ambush Stephanie in a parking lot and leave my wallet at the scene. It was genius in its cruelty real injuries to cement a fake narrative, but Stephanie beat her to the punch. Heart pounding, she drove straight to the nearest FBI field office and spilled everything: Carla's coaching, the financial records, the web of shell companies. And with that, the Bureau flipped the switch from local drama to federal case. Enter Special Agent Rivera, Organized Crime Division. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a voice that carried the weight of authority. "Mr. Cole," he said, shaking my hand, "you're not dealing with a neighborhood feud. You're standing in the middle of a racketeering operation." Racketeering? The word tasted metallic like blood in my mouth. Rivera laid it out. Multi-state property theft ring. Judges and cops on the payroll. At least $2.5 million in stolen real estate. And Carla, she was just a cog, a loud, flamboyant cog, but the engine was much bigger. The FBI wired Stephanie for sound. Every whispered conversation with Carla, every veiled threat, every admission of guilt, it was all captured in crystal clarity. One recording made my skin crawl. If he tries to fight back, Carla hissed, "We escalate. Make it messy. Men like him can't survive scandal. It'll break him." Messy wasn't an exaggeration. Carla started spiraling as the walls closed in shredding documents, burning hard drives, making calls at odd hours. We had surveillance on her, but paranoia makes people dangerous. When she told Stephanie, "If I go down, you're going with me," the FBI knew time was up. What happened next felt like watching a movie in real time, except I was in the frame. Federal raids across 3 states, judges in handcuffs. Angela Torres dragged out of an airport with $200,000 in cash stuffed in her luggage, and Carla, oh, she didn't go quietly. She barricaded herself inside my cabin, yes, the same cabin she stole from me with Stephanie as her human shield. Live streaming to thousands, she ranted about government conspiracies, claiming she was a hero protecting women from predatory property hoarders. I stood behind the FBI perimeter, heart pounding, as floodlights bathed my home in white glare. 6 hours of tense negotiation. Later, Carla stumbled out in handcuffs, still screaming, "You'll regret this." I was saving lives. For the first time in months, I felt oxygen hit my lungs, but relief was short-lived because Rivera's next words chilled me to the bone. "Ethan, this isn't over. We just kicked a hornet's nest the size of the country." The federal courthouse looked like a movie set on premiere night. News vans jammed the streets. Court TV anchors were rehearsing live hits, while camera drones buzzed overhead like metallic hornets. Inside the gallery overflowed neighbors, activists, law students, even Netflix producers sniffing for the next true crime blockbuster. Carla Bennett entered in shackles chin high like a dethroned queen still clinging to her crown. She'd fired her attorneys and decided to represent herself, a choice that turned every hearing into a deranged TED Talk about housing justice and patriarchy-fueled property hoarding. But theatrics don't erase evidence, and the prosecution had a mountain of it: 500 exhibits documenting fake abuse claims, financial trails linking shell companies to stolen properties, wire recordings where Carla boasted about teaching weak men a lesson. When the jury heard her own words, "If they can't protect their homes," that's natural selection, the oxygen seemed to leave the room. Then came the bombshell. No one saw coming. This wasn't just Carla's game. She was part of a national syndicate, 15 HOA power brokers running the same scam coast to coast. Over $50 million in real estate stolen, all laundered through bogus nonprofits preaching safe housing for survivors. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, reporters sprinting for the door, Twitter melting down in real time. Hashtags exploded: "You host cam, you justice." For homeowners, is Carla Conqueen. And Carla, she unraveled live on national television. "They're framing me," she shrieked, veins bulging as marshals restrained her. "This is a federal conspiracy. She jabbed a manicured finger at me. "He's the architect of this takedown. You're all sheep." The judge ordered her removed twice, didn't matter. The damage was done. Her meltdown became meme material before the gavel even dropped. Stephanie's testimony sealed the coffin. She spoke with raw honesty about being groomed, manipulated, and weaponized. Every tear I cried was scripted, she told the jury, voice trembling. I thought I was helping women. Instead, I was destroying lives. Real tears this time, not rehearsed ones. Angela Torres followed, dismantling the network with surgical precision, names, dates, payouts, even the training manuals for their so-called Domestic Violence Acting Academy. It was criminal theater monetized at scale. When my turn came, I didn't deliver vengeance, I delivered truth. They didn't just steal homes, I told the court. They stole trust, the glue that holds communities together. They turned compassion into a weapon, and if we don't fix the system that let this happen, it'll happen again. The jury needed 6 hours. Verdict guilty on all 47 counts: racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Sentence: 35 years, no parole, plus $2.8 million in restitution. Carla's final outburst went viral within minutes. You'll regret this. I was a hero, she screamed as marshals dragged her away. Q trending, hashtag HOA hero my ass. For most people, that was the end. For me, it was just chapter 1. Because 2 weeks later, Rivera called with a chilling update. Ethan, we've got another case. Texas this time. Same pattern. I looked at the lake shimmering beyond my cabin, the cabin I fought like hell to reclaim, and realized something. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was my mission. So if you're watching this thinking, that could never happen to me, think again. Corruption hides in plain sight wearing the mask of community service. Question everything, protect your proof, and never underestimate how far the wrong people will go when power and greed collide. If this nightmare taught me anything, it's that trust is fragile and predators know how to weaponize it. We assume our communities are safe, that people who talk about justice and helping others are on the right side. But evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile and holds a clipboard labeled community service. What Carla and her network did wasn't just theft. It was psychological warfare disguised as virtue. They exploited empathy to turn neighbors into accomplices, law into a blunt force weapon, and victims into puppets. That's the danger when systems built to protect us are hijacked, even the innocent bleed. So here's the hard truth. Good intentions don't guarantee good actors. Blind trust is a luxury you can't afford. Not in neighborhoods, not in HOA boards, not in life. Verify everything, document everything. Because when lies become law, proof is your only armor. Think this could never happen to you. Think again. Scams like this thrive because most homeowners are unprepared. Here's what you need to do now. Secure your property rights. Keep digital and physical copies of deeds, mortgages, and utility records in multiple locations. Control your narrative. Regularly monitor your property's mailing records and utility accounts for unauthorized changes. Vet your HOA demand transparency meeting minutes, financial reports, and background checks for board members. Know the law. Understand domestic violence statutes in your state. Criminals exploit gray areas. Don't be the easy mark. And above all, don't wait until your life is on fire to learn the rules. Knowledge is your firewall. Build it before someone else rewrites your story.